All right, hello everybody. We're going to get started up here with this panel discussion. So tonight, the Youth Environmental Alliance in Higher Education, or YA Network, is proud to host this panel discussion on the topic of climate leadership across generations. We're going to have two separate panels for you. The first one will be talking about innovation and advances in sustainability or climate-related initiatives on various college campuses. And the second panel will be talking about intergenerational partnerships and tensions. So this is a super important talk. We know that the youth is the future, and we know that we interact with people from different generations than us every single day. And so this dialogue is going to be really relevant in just thinking through the various, logistics and components and conversations that are associated with that. So I'm going to start by introducing our first panel. We have Tate Besser from the University of Montana. We have Maggie Del Rey from Brandeis University. We have Matthew Barmest from Brandeis University. And we have Madeline Allen from Vanderbilt and Shardul Tiwari from Michigan Technological University. And I'm your moderator, Jessica Daigneault. I'm a professor at Montana Technological University in the Civil Engineering Department. So we're going to start by talking through a few initiatives on these different respective campuses. These are very different schools in size and scope and programs offered, so it's exciting to see the initiatives happening on each campus. So starting with Montana Tech, we've got some changes happening in engineering education. Montana Tech is an engineering school. These are the people who will design the solutions that will be implemented for our future. And it is now required that engineering students are learning about sustainability. They cannot graduate unless they learn about climate change and sustainability. So it's a really great shift we're seeing. We've got an Engineers Without Borders group really focusing on those SDGs, working on sanitation projects in foreign countries, currently working on a sanitation project in Nicaragua. There's also the Center for Environmental Remediation and Assessment. Butte, Montana is a historic mining town, and there's a lot of remediation and research opportunity with that. Finally, there are new courses being offered to get students introduced to concepts of sustainability and resilience as it relates to infrastructure. So a lot of exciting things in the world of engineering happening at Montana Tech.
At the University of Montana, there's both an undergraduate and graduate environmental studies program. And both of these have opportunities to live at the Forum for Living with Appropriate Technology, or the FLAT, which is an off-campus housing that is a sustainable housing area where students are able to work on in the garden there and on sustainability projects and basically connect off-campus with other people. There's also the program in Ecological Agriculture and Society Farm, or the PEAS Farm, which is a regenerative agriculture farm where students can take internships and basically get very hands-on experience working in sustainable agriculture. I also want to highlight that has a new combined heat and power cogeneration facility, which is providing 5 megawatts of power and is reducing the greenhouse gas emissions of the university by 30%. I also just want to mention that there is a climate response club which allows students to engage in climate action and pushed for the creation of that cogeneration power plant.
And for Brandeis, my name's Maggie, and this is Matthew. We're both seniors in our undergraduate program at Brandeis. We are studying environmental studies. I have a minor in climate justice, science, and policy, and Matthew is also an econ major.
Hello, everyone. So I just want to give a bit of background to Brandeis. It was originally started after World War II by persecuted peoples who came to America, and as such, it has quite a social justice focus. It's also a small liberal arts school that uses an interdisciplinary approach to a lot of its education. And as part of this particular year, we've started our Year of Climate Action initiative, and it transcends the undergraduate program as well as two of our big graduate programs.
Hello, everyone. My name is Madeline Allen. I'm a graduate student in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at Vanderbilt University. I'm going to highlight a few of the things going on at Vanderbilt related to sustainability and climate, but feel free to talk to me afterwards if you want to hear more. So Vanderbilt really prioritizes sustainability on campus. We've committed to being carbon neutral by 2050 and have recently entered into a pretty major partnership with the Tennessee Valley Authority and Nashville Electrical Services to bring a 35 megawatt solar farm to the area. And there's also the Vanderbilt Student-Led Green Fund, which allocates $150,000 to student-led initiatives on campus. Any student can apply to it, and one of the students that's actually currently at COP, Caroline Avery, won it this past year to expand the community garden. We also just started a new program in climate and environmental studies that allows students to study the environment in a really interdisciplinary way. There's also a lot of different student organizations and fellowships and opportunities, including the Robert Penn Warrant Center for Humanities Environments Fellowship. And we've really prioritized educating students about COP. Professor Leah Dundon, who's in the audience right now, has been bringing undergraduate and graduate students to COP for several years now, and actually just got a really major grant. She's the lead PI on a $2.5 million initiative to start the Climate Leaders Academy, which will bring students from a whole bunch of different institutions to COP each year. And there's a whole wide variety of interdisciplinary research and working groups, including the Vanderbilt Climate Change Initiative, which I'm part of, the Vanderbilt Climate Change Research Network, and the Climate and Environment and Energy Futures Working Group.
Thank you very much. And generally, sitting at the end of an amazing panel, it's very difficult to add new topic into the conversation. But today evening is an exception. And I can assure you Michigan Tech is doing beyond, apart from the activities that were highlighted. Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Shardul Tiwari. I'm a fellow at Michigan Tech University. And so one of the first things that I want to highlight what Michigan Tech is doing is we are promoting renewable energy development, both for analysis, research analysis and installation. And the prime example of that is we have an in-house sustainable demonstration house where students live. They have their own farm. It is solar powered. They recycle almost all of their products. And that feeds into, they organize every 2 months a waste reduction drive, not just for the campus, but for the whole community. So it is like community alliance with Michigan Tech in terms of driving sustainable development home. Apart from that, one of the new initiatives that Michigan Tech has started is it's called Tech Forward Initiative. And one of the core components of Tech Forward Initiative is sustainability. And in there, we are trying to develop, or in fact, we're in the final stages of developing a carbon footprint calculator, where university professors or faculties and staff, they could put their numbers in how much they are driving, where they're traveling for conferences, and it can be voluntarily disclosed. And we're trying to create a sort of local voluntary carbon market where we can analyze how the carbon footprint looks like. Apart from that, yes, we have amazing programs on sustainability. Department of Social Sciences leading them. The interesting component of that is there are study abroad components of sustainability involved. So this year, summer, we're in Costa Rica. Next year, we're going to UK and Germany. So there is an international component of sustainability involved there as well. And of course, we are here at COP because of, under the sustainability initiative of Dr. Green and YA Network. And because I have limited time, so another major initiative that I could highlight is of campus gardens. It's student-led program where students grow food and they can, and then they cook for themselves. And it not just facilitates, again, Michigan Tech, but also the wider community which Michigan Tech is partner of. But yes, I think I'm looking forward to the discussion now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, panelists, for that amazing overview. Lots of exciting initiatives happening on college campuses across the country. All right, so we're going to go into our panel session here with this first question to start us off. So each panelist will answer the following question, and then we'll dive a little deeper. So my question for you all, amazing panelists, is how is the university engaging students outside of environmental topics of study in sustainability or climate on campus or in their communities? So really thinking about that interdisciplinary piece to this.
Sorry, I also just forgot to introduce myself, but I'm Tate Besser. I'm a master's student at University of Montana, focusing on environmental justice. And I think that one of the best things that does is really getting students connected with the community. Missoula has a great nonprofit scene there, and I really think that one of the aspects of the master's program is to take a class in that is an engagement piece. And so, for example, my group worked with the Missoula Food Bank, creating a food resource guide. And I think that allowing students to really connect with that community is what's really important about working on these community level, county level, city level environmental issues. I also think that working with the Peas Farm allows students to get into regenerative ag, which has a lot of benefits in terms of like carbon sequestration, in addition to providing really healthy, delicious food.
So for Brandeis, I want to start by emphasizing some of the undergraduate programs in amplifying what the youth is doing. So in terms of clubs and initiatives right now, there is Symbiosis, which is one of our programs under the Waltham Group umbrella, and that's our community outreach organization. And so this does a lot of volunteering and engagement with peoples around the university. There's also Students for Environmental Action, which is an outlet for concerned students to get to come together. It was an organization that recently came back after being put on pause during COVID. But we're excited that now with our year of climate action, it's something that's got reinvigorated. There is also Rewild Brandeis, which is part of the larger Rewild organization as a whole. It's one of its first chapters, and it uses organic land-based management. And lastly, I want to talk about Brandeis Climate Justice, which is a primarily undergraduate organization that is centered around activism and protest, but also serves as a bridge between the students and the administration in pushing for decarbonization. And lastly, I just want to give a bit of a plug to our new minor that we created in terms of interdisciplinary initiatives. So we just created this year a climate justice, science, and policy minor, which was created in part by students and their input. And it involves a lot of professors outside of STEM as a whole to get students to really think critically about the span of and reach of climate and what it can do outside of our traditional environmental lens.
Yeah, this is a great question. Thank you, Jessica. I think that one of my favorite things about Vanderbilt in general really is the focus on interdisciplinarity in everything we do. It's pretty evident in a lot of the programs and fellowships and even coursework on campus. Just to highlight one example that I love is a recent class that was offered called Climate and Society, Drowning Cities. And it was co-taught by Betsy Robinson, who's an archaeologist and historian of architecture and landscapes, Jonathan Gilligan, who's a climate scientist that specializes in coupled human-natural systems, and Steve Goodbread, who's a sedimentologist that specializes in deltaic systems. And this class really kind of dove into the past, present, and future of the interactions between society and water. And they had this really cool final project where each student got to pick any place during any time in history and really dive into what those interactions look like. And the project spanned from, ancient Rome to modern Bangladesh. And students from all different disciplines were in this class and got to kind of come together and discuss these issues. So.
No, that is very interesting, and it was interesting for me to learn about Brandeis program because at Michigan Tech we have Sustainability, Science, and Society program for bachelors, and we've included energy justice as a component there as well. So that was very interesting. But regarding this interdisciplinary nature, I want to give a personal example. So I recently graduated like last month, got done with my PhD, and my one advisor is a lawyer. My second advisor is a sociologist. My third committee member is a chemistry professor, Dr. Sarah Green, who is here. And my fourth committee member is a computational social scientist. And my department chair is a geographer. So by nature in itself, how Michigan Tech has designed the social sciences department is very interdisciplinary in nature. So, and the programs are also designed, of course, the research and education informs teaching, right? So the program in itself and the department itself is designed as very interdisciplinary. And how, if I can speak from my experience, so there are three components, the research, education, and then career, right? After we all graduate, we want jobs. And Michigan Tech is known for its career fair. So for those of you who don't know, we are a very rural campus, very north of Michigan, like literally the last big city in the north of Michigan. And when I first went there in 2020, I was told that they couldn't get enough companies to hire students because there were not enough hotels in the area. So they had like over 350 companies coming, but the more couldn't come because there were not enough hotels. And the reason for that, the career fair being such a successful event is because of the research, education informing the career making. And we're trying to bring that into sustainability as well, that now we have students who are getting trained as sustainability professionals, who are getting trained into sustainability research, who are getting trained into sustainability education. How can that be born into that interdisciplinary research gets into the hands of careers as well? So we are having this conversation with our career fair department at the university and beyond to send expertise in which is required in the industry for that interdisciplinary research and scholarship. So I think that would be one of the personal and a larger example which I've experienced being at Michigan Tech.
Thank you for those answers. Okay, Madeline, you mentioned something that caught my attention. You participated in the Robert Penn Warren Environments Fellowship. Could you please tell us a little bit more about that experience and share any details?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, the Environments Fellowship that's sponsored by the Robert Penn Warren Center for Humanities has been one of the highlights of my graduate school experience so far. Back on that kind of theme of interdisciplinary, this fellowship really brought together students from a ton of different disciplines. Anyone that had research that was even tangentially related to environment in any way was welcome to apply. And the cohort that I was in had students from English, Earth and Environmental Sciences, philosophy, teaching and learning, and a whole variety of others. And we got to meet weekly and foster really wonderful collaborations. And it was an incredible experience, and I think kind of really speaks to the nature of the interdisciplinarity of climate change and of environmental sciences in general. And from that cohort, I have lifelong friends and colleagues, a few of whom are in the audience right now. And I can tell that future cohorts will have similarly wonderful experiences.
Thank you for sharing. And then I have to know, Maggie and Matthew, what is this Year of Climate Action all about? Please tell us more.
I would love to. So the Year of Climate Action is a campus-wide set of initiatives and events. So far this year, there have already been 17 events, including lectures and taking students to a climate rally in Boston. There's been a theater production. There's been climate action dinners with professional organizers so that students can network and learn things and have a nice dinner to connect with each other as well. And in addition to the events, there are also a lot of new energy initiatives going on. So one of the things that they're doing is measuring the carbon footprint of Brandeis's endowment. So that's in large part thanks to Brandeis Climate Justice that Matthew already mentioned. They are also our fossil fuel divestment club. So they have been pushing that. And part of the Year of Climate Action is also the Decarbonization Action Plan. And along with that, they have developed an energy efficient project dashboard And that tool tracks the progress on decarbonization and makes it public so that everyone can see what's going on and what's happening, what's not happening. It provides some accountability. And going back to the interdisciplinary question, as part of the Year of Climate Action, there is an initiative called Climate in the Classroom. So a bunch of Brandeis students called Brandeis Sustainability Ambassadors, it's a paid position on campus, they emailed every single professor at the university from every single department, and they asked if they could create a presentation to tie the course material to climate change, since it really does affect everything and everyone. And a lot of professors allowed that to happen. So we have students delivering presentations that tie climate change to whatever it is that students are studying and interested in, so that they can then take that knowledge and be climate conscious in whatever career they choose, whether or not it's directly related to sustainability. And also thanks to a student group, Rewild, that Brandeis mentioned, as part of the Year of Climate Action, Brandeis has adopted some organic land management techniques, which is nice to see. And finally, we also have a new support group at our counseling center called Climate Concerns, Eco-Anxiety. And that has gotten a lot of positive feedback from students because obviously focusing in on these issues more can bring up a lot of feelings and fear and uncertainty. So yeah, the counseling center made a space for students to talk about that and learn the tools to cope with it so that they don't burn out.
Thank you for the insight. So our panelists have presented some amazing initiatives going on across college campuses across the US. And what I want to think about next is if you were at a university where these initiatives didn't exist and you wanted to get them started, how would you go about doing that? And so my question for you all next is, could you please describe or speak to some of the origins of these programs and initiatives? What were the motivations? How did they get started? If you have any suggestions for others, you can share those as well. And we'll start with you, Tate.
As I mentioned, the combined heat and power plant was basically suggested by the UN Climate Action Club. And I think that was a really great initiative where they worked with the Office of Sustainability to have the university improve its carbon footprint. And like I said, it reduced it by up to 30%, and that plant is also able to take biogas or hydrogen. So I think that's just a way for students to interact with the office and with the provost and really get some of these climate plans going forward and actually having a dialogue with some of those administrators.
As Matthew mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, Brandeis is an institution founded on social justice values, and that's something that they are very proud of. So it attracts a student body that tends to be socially active and interested in justice, broadly speaking. So because of that, we have these great student organizations who are pushing for change in a lot of different disciplines. And Matthew?
So in terms of our Year of Climate Action itself, its origins were really by student demand because of the nature of a social justice institution. There was a lot of emotional and mental need just for people to come together. And students really spoke to their professors a lot about this. And fortunately, one benefit of it being a smaller school is there's really a lot of interpersonal connection with professors. And they, being the professors, took that to our Office of Sustainability, and they were able to work with the institution as a whole to put some of these events in place as our Year of Climate Action. So I think the broad takeaway for universities is really to let the students themselves push a lot of these new initiatives and feel the pulse of what students are wanting.
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to highlight was the development of our new Climate and Environmental Studies program. It's really exciting to have an entirely new program and new major at Vanderbilt, and I think this really came out of professors just talking together about the critical need for interdisciplinary students and community members to tackle some of these issues at the interface of climate and society. And this program really brings together natural sciences, social sciences, and humanities. And we were able to hire a lot of really incredible new faculty. And the program itself really spans everything from religious studies to political science to anthropology to biology and environmental sciences. So really bringing together people from so many different disciplines. And I think it really just came from conversations about how critical it is to bring people together with different backgrounds and different perspectives to not only talk about these issues, but really educate students on them and prepare them to tackle them outside of the classroom in their careers and beyond.
Again, as the last speaker, I have to piggyback on what my speakers have said before, but like Brandeis program about divestment, I can give example of at Michigan Tech, we have Kiuna Youth for Climate Action, KYC, and they are pushing for divestment as well at Michigan Tech. But apart from that, as a policy student, I could say that student-led activities are very important, but it is also very important to have an institutional memory so that students who are doing the work right now also interact with the new incoming students so that that institutional memory develops about the work that has already been done so that we are not reinventing the wheel again. So I think that's why student-led activities working with the institution so that we don't reinvent the wheel and the institutional memory develops is very important because policy making, as we all are here in the UN, we understand is a very time-consuming and laborious process. So it's one thing is very important to not reinvent the wheel, and as institutional group, or the different groups that are in our universities, we have that institutional memory in place. And we teach and also work with the new incoming students. I think that is very important. So it's research and teaching informing the career goals, I think, which is very important in my understanding.
Great. So in our discussions leading up to this panel, some emerging themes came up, and one of those is that we have these institutions that have a history of maybe industry, mining, et cetera, but now those institutions are actually funneling research into figuring out how that past industrial use can be, move forward toward beneficial use. And so while not completely related to that, I think it'd be great to hear more about this cogen plant because we talked about how it actually is forward thinking and that it can use completely green fuels in the future. So if you could speak a little bit to that, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I feel like that's actually a really great segue because Montana has typically been almost called like a company town state in terms of all the extractive industries. And I feel like this plan is one of the great initiatives that is really showing Montana's way forward towards a green economy. The university has some projects with solar panels, but this power plant is able to be completely fitted with biogas or hydrogen, which is really a great opportunity for in the future when we'll be able to rely more on these other sources of fuel that are better than natural gas. Also, the plant is combining heat and power, and that steam is actually really beneficial to help heat classrooms. If you don't already know, Montana gets a lot of snow in the winter. I'm actually pretty excited to be able to come out here away from the snow for a week or two. But that's a really great, just like combining those two in order to reduce emissions and also provide necessary inputs for the classroom. And also eventually transition. I think the university is really planning on when they have some sustainable sources of hydrogen or biogas before that transition takes place.
Yeah, we know that any infrastructure that's built now is going to be in place for 50 to 75 years, and so thinking ahead like that and being prepared for what's coming is really important. Otherwise, you spend a bunch of money to build a facility that doesn't last through these transitions that we're anticipating. Okay, so related to that, I also wanted to ask Shardul if you'll highlight a little bit more about what's called the PUSH project at Michigan Tech, which is related to that beneficial reuse of abandoned mines.
Yes, no, so this is my bias speaking, but this is my favorite question so far. But the reason for that is Secretary Granholm the other day talked about energy storage being the critical element. Now renewable energy transition is happening. We have solar and wind energy coming in. But one thing that is critical to is energy storage development. That's where things need to move forward. And as some of you might know, I come from Upper Peninsula of Michigan, that's where I study, and we have a legacy of iron and copper mining history. And what is happening and how these two things are connected is that more than 90% of global energy storage today is pumped hydro storage. But what requires for development of pumped hydro storage is greenfield sites. That means we would have to remove flora, fauna, people from their location to develop energy storage, which makes it very difficult to develop either it in global north or in global south, right? So this is one common thing that is binding us together. So one technology that Michigan Tech is working on through the inputs and by the inputs of the community is what we call as PUSH, which is pumped underground storage hydro technology, where we convert abandoned underground mines, which are brownfield sites, into hydro energy storage facilities, which are completely underground, right? So this storage development is happening beneath the surface with water, and what this does is that mines which are already filled with water, that mine water, which might be contaminated, might not be contaminated, but will eventually leak into the groundwater. We know about Colorado mining disaster a few years ago. So this PUSH project and redeveloping these abandoned underground mines not only helps us in developing a sustainable energy transition, but also helps us avoid that negative externality of this mine water leaking into fresh water. And we come from Great Lakes region, so we are like home to most of the fresh water in the world, right? So it is very important for us to preserve our heritage, not just as a resource, but also as a cultural heritage. So it is more about converting brownfield sites and not creating more brownfield sites, because the less we mine lithium, the less mining extraction and historical legacies will create. So that's the basic principle. I'm always more than happy to talk about it because that's on what I wrote my dissertation. So one thing PhD scholars love to geek about is their dissertation research, because very few people listen. So please talk to me if you want to after this conversation. Thank you.
I can't say I agree with your last statement. I never want to talk about mine. All right, so thank you, panelists, for your insight and sharing everything with the audience. I'd like to open it up. It seems like we have about 4 minutes to take some questions, if we have some audience questions. Is there a microphone?
So, Leah Dundon, Vanderbilt University. I'm curious about what kind of education around climate change you had in high school, and especially for those that didn't have really any. What drew you in college? Was it one class, one event? Was it gradual? Is there something inspirational? If you could talk to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, in high school, I just had the environmental studies, the AP class. If you know, it's just basically a class that gives you a bit of college credit. And that was kind of the only class that drew me in. But I just took a chance, and my undergrad, you had to apply with a major. And I just decided environmental studies and natural resource management. And it was a pretty great fit. I just ended up loving most of my classes at Cal Poly in California, which has a learn by doing motto. So I was able to get out in the field a little bit in my undergrad, which really stoked that flame and helped me go on to a master's.
I really like this question. I had no climate change education as part of my high school education. And I went into Brandeis thinking I was going to be a sociology major. I'm not a STEM person. I still might not call myself a STEM person. Because of that, I wanted to get my science requirement out of the way as soon as possible. So I took the introductory class to environmental at my freshman year, first semester. Little did I know, I would fall in love with the subject. The class was made so accessible to anyone, no matter your background. And I think even if you do have background, it's still interesting because it's really project-based. You're like going into the woods and making observations and learning to identify native tree species and local tree species. So, I don't know, I really appreciated that.
Yeah, great question. In high school, I just had AP Environmental Sciences, taught by Michael Griffin, who's one of my favorite teachers of all time. And that definitely a little bit got me hooked, but in college I actually came in majoring in neuroscience, was pre-med, was not planning to study climate, and took Earth in the Atmosphere with Ralph Benartz, and it just kind of drew me in, and I kept taking a few other classes and telling myself that it was going to be a kind of hobby on the side type passion, but just realized that that was my favorite thing to think about, and that there was a lot of critical issues at that forefront, and ended up kind of, yeah, fully focusing on it, and now planning to do it for the rest of my life.
For me, I grew up in a small town in rural India in Himalayas, 7,000 feet above sea level. I did not have any courses in climate policy or energy policy class, but the reason I got into energy and environment policy is because we didn't have electricity growing up. I studied in kerosene lamps, and when I moved to a bigger city and I realized, no, there is other way of energy sources as well, that you can have electricity and you don't have to sit next to a lamp to study. So I think that directed my study towards energy. And then in undergrad, I realized that energy is the core of climate policy. So I think that was the relationship between energy and climate policy that derived me. And I mean it when I say it. Nikki, thank you so much for a great question, because I think this is the first time in public forum I've mentioned that I studied in kerosene lamps. So it brings back memories. Thank you.
Looks like we've got another question in the back.
Thank you. My name's Dennis Plain from Juniata College. So thinking about these different programs that you have and initiatives, I'm wondering how to go about setting them up. Were these sort of bottom up from students or top down from administrators, or some advice would be welcome. Thank you.
And for the sake of time, maybe if there's someone who feels strongly about this one, go ahead.
From policy perspective, I can summarize it. I think it's a mix of both. At the institutional level, if there is a faculty or a couple of faculty or a group of faculties who are interested in starting these programs and feel strongly about climate policy program, I know we were lucky enough that we had those kind of professors in our university, and one of the best person in our university to talk to about that is Dr. Sarah Green. She's right there. And then, of course, the bottom-up approach. The more push there is from student side that this is what we want, this is what market is asking us for, this is what we really care about. So I don't think it's always one thing, it's always a combination of both of them. It's not a binary 0 and 1 answer. I think it has to be the combination of both top-down and bottom-up approach coming together and then creating or co-creating these programs along with the community where these programs are getting developed.
Great, so that is it for us. We are out of time. I'd like to thank this amazing group of panelists for joining us and for sharing your initiatives and programs with the group. And now I'd like to welcome our next topic, intergenerational partnerships and tensions, up to the front.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Closer, is that better? Okay, great. Thank you so much. I first want to thank the first set of panelists and moderator we just had. They did a wonderful job. I'm here to introduce the second panel of this side event. My name is Pamela Templer. I'm a professor and chair of the Department of Biology at Boston University. I am also a faculty member in YA, which is the Youth Environmental Alliance in Higher Education. I'm a forest ecologist and biogeochemist who studies carbon sequestration in forests. I'm just going to give us a very brief introduction to kick us off, and then I'm going to let the panelists go with some targeted questions. So around the globe, we know that people from different generations are experiencing climate change and climate solutions differently. People in my generation, born in the 1970s and 80s, did not hear about climate so much. If we heard about environment in the news, it was acid rain and biodiversity loss in the Amazon. And of course, young people growing up today are hearing about climate all the time. Multiple surveys, such as the Pew Research Center, show that as a result, different generations are viewing climate change differently. We know that, as mentioned in the last panel, our younger generations are feeling it. Climate anxiety is real. They want adults, older adults themselves, to pursue climate action. And as a result, they are pursuing solutions, which is really inspiring, especially to see so many youth here at COP27. So today we've assembled this panel that we're going to talk about climate leadership across generations. We're going to hear from 3 people from a younger generation, 3 people from an older generation about how each of them have approached climate science, not older, just more experienced, how they might be different, and how they might work together successfully to collaborate and make the world a better place. So now I'm going to introduce our 6 panelists, so please just raise your hand when I mention your name, and then we'll start off with some questions. So Ayush Chutani is a PhD student in mechanical engineering at Michigan Technological University. Sydney Collins is an undergraduate in environmental science at the University of Connecticut. Jason Velasquez is a master's student of environmental science at Yale School of the Environment, yes. Arietta Rakai is the lead program officer at IRENA, which stands for the International Renewable Energy Agency. Dorceta Taylor is the professor of environmental justice and senior associate dean of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Yale School of the Environment. And last but not least, Mark Urban is professor of ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of Connecticut. Okay, so now I'm going to ask all of the panelists some questions. We're going to start with our 3 from the younger generation first, and then we'll go to the others. So my first question, and just to ask that we want to hear from all of you, so please keep your remarks brief. Please target about 2 minutes, and I'll raise my hand if you're about out of time. So the first question for all of you is, how would you describe how your generation has approached the climate crisis? And please use stories from your own personal experiences. We'd love to hear them.
All right, thank you so much. So I was born in 1999, so I am the older end of Gen Z, and we are sort of like the first generation to be born with tablets in our hands and the screens all directly in front of us. And so anytime there's sort of a disaster, any environmental challenge, we've been able to see that growing up, and we've been able to have access to that almost instantly. And sort of so that media consumption of always being able and always being on has allowed us to work in this space of sort of mutual aid and funding and sending resources to communities that need some of that direct funding. But it's also created this challenge where we also have to acknowledge our climate anxieties, as mentioned before. We have to take care of ourselves, and it's also allowed us to really dive into the historical components of why people are experiencing the climate injustices that they're facing. So when we're thinking about, my family's from Puerto Rico, when we think about the same economic policies that were fueling the manufacturing industry, those are the same industries that were displacing our people. So there's just a lot at our fingertips, and being able to see Hurricane Fiona in Puerto Rico, and seeing Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, the flooding this year in Nigeria and Pakistan, in Cuba and in Dominican Republic, we're really able to just have it all, and we're sort of the first generation of humans to really be able to experience that. So it's just a lot of processing. It allows us to connect and figure out how we got to where we are now, the existing tools, and some of the, how do we sort of envision that revolutionary future while also using the tools at hand to be able to de-escalate from where we are now.
Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Sydney. Before I start, I just want to send my round of thank yous, first to the faculty that helped organize this trip to get me in Egypt today, our donors that funded this trip, as well as the students and faculty that I learn from every single day, and I really appreciate you guys. So I have 2 things that I want to touch. First, our generation has a lot of urgency when it comes to addressing the climate crisis because we recognize that our generation will disproportionately feel the impacts of the climate crisis, and it is our future. And there's a lot of awesome youth-led movements going around globally. And I'm really proud to be here with other UConn students as we pushed our administration to commit to carbon neutrality by 2030 recently in the past couple of weeks, and hopefully we can further to get them to commit to carbon neutral by 2040. So first, recognizing that sense of urgency that youth has, but also recognizing that climate change isn't just a technical issue, but it is propelled by those deeper systematic issues like you mentioned. So there was a quote from the Grassroots Justice Alliance, which has a booth at COP that I wanted to read. And they mentioned climate change is a result as well as a symptom of the dysfunction of the current system, and consequently can only be truly addressed by changing the system. Climate justice is a fight to transform the global economic system and for the just redistribution of resources. So this really recognizes how fossil fuel infrastructure is able to be constructed because it devalues people of color and indigenous communities by shifting the burden onto them. And I sit here today really excited because I took a class and we read a lot of Dorceta Taylor's work, so I'm fangirling a little bit here. It was taught by Dr. Dillon, who I believe was your student. So while I don't personally have the perspective of a person of color, a lot of our generation is still recognizing how our identities affect how we show up in climate spaces as well as what spaces we have the access to. Personally, I identify as a queer folk, a neurodivergent folk with ADHD, a woman, and a youth member, and I'm proud of that. But I think recognizing the strengths and challenges that brings, first, there's a lot of conversation within the neurodivergent community if it's a disability, and I think it comes back to when we don't have access to those spaces, it is, because it hinders our ability to function, as well as a lot of neurodivergent people are invalidated and often thought as incompetent, and that affects, the spaces that we're able to be in. So also just representation in those spaces as with my neurodivergent identity as well as my queer identity and seeing people within those spaces. However, kind of one of my last things, and then I'll finish up, is there's a lot of strengths, especially when I think about my neurodivergence, is we're really creative and innovative. We think Greta Thunberg is publicly autistic and ADHD, and we can be key people when it comes to building climate solutions, but we need that representation and that inclusion to be able to do that.
Oh, hello. So my experience or how do I approach the climate crisis is purely mathematical because as an engineering student, I looked at the problem of energy efficiency and I was like, okay, this is a mathematical problem. This is what I should progress. So that's how I have been studying all my life. Like bachelor's was mechanical engineering, designing a car. Never thought I would do something related to climate change. But it was really in the master's education when I got exposed to like very complicated problems. Okay, this is maybe like designing a car is not what our generation needs. Maybe designing a better energy efficient system is what drives me. And also, there's like one regional motivator that inspired me because I come from like New Delhi, India, and even though it is not a climate issue, but air pollution is like a very big issue, and we need like immediate solutions to combat that. And for that, a lot of talk was during the college was to go and look for the electric cars as well as battery development. Maybe that's why I started looking at it as like a problem of air pollution, but now when I studied more, it became like, okay, air pollution is just a subset of climate crisis. So why not just dedicate your own mathematics, which you know, just towards the same goal, and end up being like a PhD student in a solar industry. So that's how like my generation is tackling from a very technical point of view, like how to combat climate crisis, to use your skills which you learn along the way. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity to be here and also for this platform to announce to the whole world that we are officially old, even though we are young at heart. But we'll put it down to experience. I was born in the 1970s, and before the climate crisis, there was the energy crisis. And for us with gray hairs, we are all aware of that. And coupled with that, I come from a very small island in the Pacific, in Fiji. So when that trickles down to an island, it's all about our lives, it's about our survival. So the energy costs were high, we were trying to get food on the table, we were trying to get access to water, health, and other essential services. So for us, before the climate crisis came, there was already all these challenges lined up. But we were blessed in a way that we also had a rich culture with rich traditional practices. For example, we had sustainable fishing. You only take what is enough for your family. There was a communal where we share. There was little to go around, but we share. So all these traditional practices we applied to the energy crisis, first of all. And we tried to come up with tailor-made solutions. It could be 2 solar panels, but these panels can give lighting that in my time gave me the opportunity to study with electricity. It can also pump up water from the wells and also help out the neighbors too in meeting their needs. So for me, this is just a continuation. But the exciting thing that we already started with the solution. The panel that went before us, that was quite encouraging and heartening to see the young people now. They are not just sitting and talking. They are coming up with solutions, and you are there on the ground. And I hope that you'll, take that out from the US and take it to the LDCs. My focus in International Renewable Energy Agency is on the small island developing states. So we hope that we'll partner up and take these solutions to the communities and to the people that need them most. Thank you.
Thanks for coming and listening, and welcome to the Old People's Club. When I was a student, there was nothing called environmental justice. My professors at Yale thought I was really crazy, and one of the reasons I did a PhD in sociology and one in the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies was to try to think intersectionality and blend it. When in 1990, 20 of us met at University of Michigan, and they locked us in a room for literally 4 days. I remember not seeing anything of Ann Arbor. That was it for what we were going to call environmental justice. Only 3 of us were students, but we understood the urgency. We understood the calling. We understood what made us different, and we understood that we had to work harder than we've ever worked in our lives. And I run into a lot of EJ students who don't believe in work. They believe in getting a sign, getting this, doing something flashy, and they think it's all going to happen. You have to go out and collect the data. You have to do that extra hours while your friends are at the bar. You cannot do this 9 to 5. And I've had 5 students say to me this year, I only do 9 to 5 and I don't work on the weekend. And I'm like, really? Good luck. You're not even going to make it out of my lab. You don't know it yet. So you have to be able to do all of those things, that urgency combined with a strategy. And so if we go back to that 20 of us at Michigan in 1990, a year later, 600 of us showed up in Washington, D.C. for the first People of Color Summit, because we recognized right away 20 of us couldn't do it. So we had to go out and recruit community people, recruit people who weren't normally into the conversation. And the question I was going to ask the panel before me was, what do you do on your campuses? Because a lot of the environmental conversation is still held up with white students, white professors, and they talk to themselves. They completely exclude or bypass or look over students of color, communities of color. And so one of the pieces of work that has to be done, especially amongst predominantly white institutions, is that broadening out of the base so that 30 or 40 of you are not trying to do the work, you broaden it out to the whole campus. And as I wrap up this part of my conversation, the next time you go to your environmental meeting, if you look around the room and everybody is white, stop the meeting and go out and start recruiting. Right here, right now, don't continue the meeting.
I just want to say what a privilege it is to be on this panel with such a great group of participants. It's really an amazing place to be. So I want to go back to the year 1985, and maybe by a show of hands I can see who was born after 1985 in the audience. And how about before 1985? So what's critical about that year is that every month from 1985 on was hotter than the average before that. And so essentially in 1985 is this period in the history of the world in which the Earth became hot Earth. And so before that we had cool Earth. And those of you who raise your hands being born before then, like myself, has a historical perspective on what Earth looked like before it really changed. And so we do have that baseline. And then we saw the Earth through its stages of going from normal Earth or cool Earth to something very different. And so that's definitely been hard to witness, but I don't think it's hard as the next generation that's had to deal with these tremendous cataclysms and the threat of so many more in their future. And so the other part about being from this generation is that we failed. It's very hard to live with that our generation failed to protect the next generations from that. And something I wake up with every day, and I apologize to everyone who raised their hand for not doing enough. So we're faced with what can we do, and I chose. There's lots of different ways we have to choose based on our interests and our abilities. I chose to be a scientist, to really cultivate the ability to provide information to policymakers and the media when it comes down to my specialty of biodiversity and climate change. But equally important to me is my role as a professor. And so the ability to teach students, but really as much learn from them has been just an amazing part of my experience. And yes, even conspire with the students to work on these issues has been really wonderful for me. So I'll just leave with a quote from a wise woman who once said, "Teach them well and let them lead the way." It's Whitney Houston for all those who from the other generation. But that's true. That's sort of what I see my role in bringing students here and really trying to facilitate the leadership to bring us out of this crisis.
Thank you so much. I just want to say I stand corrected. As somebody born in the 1970s, we're not older, we're just mid-career. How's that? I was going to actually ask next, what do you see as differences between your generations? But some of that came up already. So what I'm going to do is let you share what you think might be differences, but I want to spin that more constructively. How do you think the generations could work together to help solve the climate crisis? And why don't we start with Arietta first, and then we'll go back to Mark, and then we'll come this way.
Thank you, Pamela. Looking at it from the perspective of the International Renewable Energy Agency, I believe that we can provide a platform for youths, university students, whether it's internship programs, whether it's convening universities and the governments, because our members are the governments, the ministries of energy and the ministries of climate change. It would be really great to have most of these innovative solutions replicated and tailor-made to some of these least developed countries and small island developing states. And also, there are also remote communities out there that we can work with, including the indigenous, those that are vulnerable. We're looking at providing services, health, water. So in my current capacity, I would really hope that we can work together. We have youth forums. It's in the margins of our General Assembly that is usually convened every January in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. And it's more exciting because they are hosting the COP next year. So why don't we start right in January and work together, or we provide the platform, you can speak with the UAE, you speak with other countries that can come and provide the support that is needed by the university students, the research centers, to have this translated into communities and countries that need it most. I leave it there rather than talking about other solutions that are, thanks.
I do think one of the things that I see sometimes getting in the way is the older generation, so the gray-haired people, especially when they're the ones that, quote unquote, founded a movement or got things started. They tend to be a little protective of that because they've put in the millions of hours. If you go back into the 1990s, virtually every environmental justice organization was run out of somebody's living room or basement. They had no sleep, they got no pay, they got no funding. So now that there is recognition of it, one has to kind of respect and understand why they're a little bit protective of that. And that protection sometimes often bypasses youth or bypass people with different ideas, different ways of coming to the problem, and different solutions. So because we have one generation that might be a little bit inward-looking and exclusive, that leaves us oftentimes without leveraging the resources that are sometimes staring us right in the face. For the younger generation, sometimes the very brashness really sets people off. So I find a lot of younger people that don't really show respect for the people whose shoulders they're standing on. Again, if you go back into the literature, those of you who are doing scholarly work or even activist work, there wasn't a lot of documentation on some of the community struggles in the 1980s and the 1990s. It doesn't mean that they weren't happening. It just means that it's now a lot easier to see it. So when young people march into places like Detroit or St. Louis or Warren County or take a bus down to Cancer Alley and think they have the answer, I used to literally chase every student when I was at the University of Michigan for 27 years who marched in and go, I'm going to go to Detroit and fix it. I said, do you think black people in Detroit are stupid? If the problem was that easy that you could just drive down 45 minutes and fix it, they would have fixed it. They're Detroiters. So understand the complexity and taking the time and the humility. So there is a balance between the hubris that you need and the I will not take no for an answer that you need, to combine that with humility and to understand that people do have answers, the communities have answers, they just don't have the resources and the fancy degree behind their names. And I often, when I was at Michigan, take my students to get schooled, because I know a number of people who didn't even finish grammar school that can school every PhD, master's, and undergrad in the environment field about what's going on in their community and how it can work. So between generations, it's that give and take that must happen to know when to exit leadership and when to move into leadership, to know how to respect who's coming behind, and to do the things to bring those people behind you behind. So one of the things that goes on with many in the younger generation is they're not cultivating that next generation of leadership. They're not mentoring at the high school and the grammar school level. They're not recruiting. So, because they're really so into themselves and their Instagram photos. So it's a little bit of both sides doing a little bit of give and take and understanding that that combination of new people coming in who are just entering the field in the last year or so versus those who've been there 20 or 30 or 40 years, that can happen, that can be blended well together. And that's my hope that something like COP can really start to re-energize that and take away some of the fear that people have that, oh, you're taking my stuff.
Just to build on that, I think that one of the things that the next generations can take from our generation is to learn from our mistakes. We've made many of them, unfortunately, but if you listen to us, we can tell you what those mistakes were, and hopefully, like history, you can avoid those and even go farther and faster than we were able to go. The other part about this is I think that we need from the next generation, we need their energy and their enthusiasm, because it's been a long road, and sometimes we're tired and a little bit cynical, and it's the next generation that can bring back that fire that we had back when we were their age, and so really appreciate that part. I think the third part is they say many hands make light work, and I think that it's not just many hands but many diverse hands is really going to be important for us to solve this crisis, and we got to make sure that all generations are at the table, both literally and figuratively, so that we can work together to solve this crisis.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I want to give a huge thank you to Dr. Taylor as well. She's my academic advisor, and is someone who's been so influential in my life in terms of running the Doors to Conservation Scholars Program, which is now the Yale Emerging Leaders Initiative. And that program was really my first experience in having sort of the respect and platform through a summer internship and through research experience that without I probably wouldn't be here today. I think Dr. Taylor has done an amazing job at uplifting first-gen low-income students, people of color, Black students, Latin students, and being in this space. And so with that, I think if you're running organizations, I think Dr. Taylor also said this, but that idea of succession planning, figuring out how are you bringing youth into your board, are you going to have a youth advisory board in your organization, even if they're not influential completely in terms of decision making, but just really supporting emerging leaders. And if you are in a position to be crafting new job positions and new job descriptions, I don't think I'm the only young person in here right now who is sort of worrying about figuring out how do we balance our values of change with work that needs to be done, with work that's available, and sort of figuring out how do we align all of that while also still getting paid to live the lifestyle that we want to live in the cities that we want to live in, or the rural communities that we want to live in. Is really tough. So just keeping that in mind when being transparent about salaries, when being transparent about benefits, and just truly supporting those who have historically been left out of these conversations is really important. And I think the other piece is just communication. I think our generation is really, really big on calling things for what they are. We're not afraid to call out colonialism. We're not afraid to call out imperialism, racism, sexism, and the list goes on and on. But I also think with that, we have to define what we mean when we say those things, because you can say that in a conversation that people might not have the context that you do to be able to do that. So it's the fire that Dr. Taylor was talking about, while also having that humility of acknowledging that you might be in an elevated academic space to provide some of that language that others might not have, but then also using that from a historical component to be able to share that light and be able to share that communication.
So I think there's a couple things that we can do intergenerationally, especially within white spaces, and it's unlearning and relearning, healing from the values of these oppressive systems such as competition, individualism, as well as reconciling the harm that's been undone to communities, especially communities of color and indigenous communities. And there's two kind of macro scale and micro scale things that I want to bring to light. So first, Dr. Taylor was saying, especially within UConn, this isn't an institution that has been traditionally run by older white men. And this is where science has been made, this is where decisions been made, and it's determined who is accredited and valued, and then who has access to those spaces. So first, as a youth member, it is really disempowering how many times I've heard, you're only 18, you're only 19, and just that level of discreditation you get by being younger, as well as not having access to a seat at the table. Our Board of Trustees at UConn is the big financial body that makes all the decisions on campus, and we have one undergraduate student representative. That is one undergraduate student representative out of approximately 20,000 undergraduates. And that highlights the fact that there's a huge lack of opportunity for youth to communicate what they want to see on campus, especially being 75% of the university's revenue based on our tuition. That's unacceptable. And I also, yeah. And I also want to recognize, the other identities as well that don't have access to those spaces, as well as aren't accredited and valued. Some of the students and I were reflecting on a panel we went to talking about indigenous knowledge and community knowledge, and often within, past IPCC reports, how you needed peer-reviewed research to be included in that and be, valued as science, and how that left a huge disparity in recognizing the importance and value of indigenous wisdom. And with climate solutions, we need to be led and guided by this indigenous knowledge, and we need to allow space for community-led knowledge and their participation when we're developing climate solutions. So also then on a micro scale, I know I mentioned accessibility, and I think it's really important to be intentional about the accessibility of the everyday spaces that we exist in. I think there's a lot of ableism in the climate movement. We can think about, people with disabilities, physical disabilities, and how they'll be impacted disproportionately by impacts of climate change like mobility. And we can also think about neurodivergence, and how there's a lot of difficulties with access to information. I've just been reflecting a lot at COP, and how there's a lot of barriers to access with spaces at COP. Going to a lot of panels that are just listening and not having closed captions is really difficult, or not having alternate modes of learning such as visuals and stuff, and it really affects access to information and being involved in those movements and involved in those spaces. So if people don't have that level of inclusion, not only is there not maybe a seat at the table for them, but they can't even get there anyways. So I think kind of with a lot of that, there's a lot of opportunity and necessary work that can be done across generations to build that. There's one last thing I want to mention, is just building more relationships across generations really goes back to indigenous principles of valuing your elders as well as seeing your youth as the stewards of future generations.
Thank you so much. I would like to reiterate on the part about how the generation which we, like Mark said, born before 1985. So I was reading into it, and then there's like a root of, it's not a problem, but you have to understand it. So the experienced generation were born in the time when they were growing up with, for example, like I say this as an example, as an engineer, as an automotive or mechanical engineer, they had their like dream cars. They were growing up having dream cars, like I will buy a Mustang and all those things. And then our generation came, and when I say our generation is the one who are doing like masters and PhD at this level, Our generation became exposed to a lot of different technology. Our dreams were the same, but we got exposed to a lot of like different crises in our lifetime when we were growing up, like teenage years as well as our like early education into bachelor's completely shifted. Like I have seen transition from like a oil-based car development in bachelor's to electric car development in my master's. And this new generation, which Dr. Taylor mentioned that we are not mentoring, is the new generation who are who are the teenagers now, who are born with their Instagram accounts before they are born. Like they have access to the mobile phones, so they are being born into an era where they cannot dream about oil-based cars. Their dream would be a Tesla or like a pollution outside airs or like the noise which is going on in media. So there has been a loss of generation, like our generation, which transitioned from a very stable future back in the day of having good dreams and following those to a new generation who's being born in like a constant anxiety, climate crisis. So our generation, who would be the next decision makers in the coming 10 years, are the lost generations, and we have a huge responsibility to that I know I take it upon myself to guide the new generations because our generation might not be able to do it, but it's our moral responsibility to tell them that we know that we will not be able to do it, but they should do it so our future generations can prosper. And then I have a huge respect. There's one more thing that I would like to highlight about like what we already are learning from future generation, books and journal articles written by everyone. Like all in our research, we have been reading something which was written like 10 years, 20 years, the fundamentals we call it. So that is the best thing that the generation can give us, the knowledge transfer. We subconsciously do it, but we do not like give that credit. We don't respect it that much. We should respect the knowledge from our elders or any of the researchers which have done like benchmarking research papers or books. So those are the best thing. You are already doing it. You just need to acknowledge it. Thank you.
So I have more questions, but I'd like to first open it up to the audience to see if you have any out there. Anybody? Oh, please. Do we have a microphone for someone in the audience? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Monet. I'm also a student at the University of Connecticut, and I have been thinking a lot, being at COP, just what the future generations, even younger than us, are going to face when they come into this world. I've had problems of figuring out if I even want to have kids, for problems of do I want to bring a kid into this world if it's going the way it's going, or do I want to have them contribute to the carbon problem? So I was just wondering, for our experienced generation, what is going to make or break our generation's ability to avoid the mistakes that maybe your generation or priors have made? And for the younger generation, what is the legacy you want to leave for the next generations? Thank you, yeah.
Thank you. Would any of you like to take that first?
As you guys were talking, I was just thinking, those of you who know my work know that one of the things I do is environmental history. And when you look back at the journals of 19th century proto-environmentalists, you see the word climate change in it. So George Perkins Marsh, 1865, he was one of the early environmentalists. You see him talking about the decline in both plant and bird species. And he literally uses that term, that change in climate. He attributes what he was seeing. We see some of the early feminist environmental writers and thinkers in that mid-19th century period talking about it and talking about how we need to do something about it. What we need now is we've talked a lot. We've known that the problem existed a lot. We've also denied it a lot. What's changed for this current generation and the generations to come? And we can think also in terms of indigenous knowledge, making decisions for 7 generations. 7 generations out, 7 generations from behind. And if we think about in a very conscious ways, you talk about, are you going to have children or not? Where are we going to put schools? We're probably sitting in one of the most artificially created places I've ever seen in my life. And, you know, even though COP has been great, I'm thinking this is crazy, this whole setup of this conference. But we have to think in terms of that very long term and then think action as opposed to writing it and just kind of let it float in the wind. We now have, so we don't have just 1 or 2 or a handful of people, the Thoreaus and those folks talking about it. I think we have most of the globe now understanding and talking about it. And the million-dollar question is, how are we gonna strategize, incentivize that, and turn that into kind of a series of kind of global pieces. So it's not the 80s, it's not the 90s, where most people in the opinion polls didn't think it was real. It's now the complete flip, where most people actually think it's real. And so it's for us to realize that moment that we're in and to do something with that kind of global thing. I don't know if you guys have been going to some of the Africa presentations, but you're seeing some really amazing stuff coming out of very poor countries, rural villages. And to me, that to me is the most exciting part of this, is to see just how widespread. So perk up. We have more momentum on our side than we think we do. So if we all leave here with a pledge, some kind of pledge, every one of us, to do something, I think the deniers are gonna probably, you know, we will win, I think.
Hi, my name is Maggie. I'm also a student from the University of Connecticut. So I first wanted to start off by saying that I completely recognize my privilege as a white woman in this space going to a university in the United States. I think being at COP has, made me realize that more than I've ever imagined. And I think if I, in this position, feel so uncomfortable coming to older generations with my opinions, how do other people with marginalized identities feel in the same spaces? When I have ideas and thoughts and opinions, and I don't know if other students in the room feel this way too, I am extremely anxious and nervous to go to even professors sometimes to give my opinion. And my professors do a great job of making me feel comfortable. And so I'm graduating, and I'm very nervous to go into the workforce with adults who have not been trained to provide that support for me. I've been in school my whole life, and I'm extremely lucky to have been in that setting too. So I think, I have a question for the whole panel, for, the student leaders, but also, for the adults. What advice would you give to us students who don't necessarily feel like our voices want to be heard in other spaces? Not with the 3 of you sitting on the panel who are obviously more than willing to have these conversations. That's why you've been included. But, for, amongst the representatives of these other companies who aren't attending these panels and who don't want to listen to me, but who don't want to listen to people from communities who have been historically left out, and people who look like me haven't. And I think that that's really important to highlight as well.
Run a boycott and don't buy their products, and trust me, they're afraid of you. They're afraid of all of you when you ask Nike what some of us did in the 90s. My poor daughters still will probably send me off to a nursing home someplace because they've never worn any Nike shoes or Nike clothes. And even at high school, at the hockey team, you will not put my daughters in Nike clothing. So part of it is understanding where your strengths are and take what might be, what you might see as a deficit and turn it into a positive. And what we all have is spending power. And that's one thing we can actually mobilize, and cops are not, I wish they were mobilizing more of that. Suppose all 60,000 of us that came in here the past 2 weeks pick 1 or 2 or 3 products that we're gonna boycott till they change. So there's some really interesting things we can do. How do you spend your dollars? Where do you spend it? Your universities, you're the clients, you're paying the tuition. If they don't hire faculty of color, go someplace else. So you have to start thinking along those lines to force them to understand your power as opposed to you thinking they have all the power. Sorry about that.
No, thank you. We only have a couple minutes left, so I want to see, do any of the students want to answer that?
Yeah, just one answer. If you are worried about somebody elder not listening to you or you're not being heard, be loud. And how you can be loud? Study and learn more, and whatever you say, make sure you are saying it correctly. If you are correct, you can raise your voice as high as you can, and you would be heard, trust me. I have done it, and it works.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I think that's something I also think about in just trying to figure out how do I advocate for myself and my communities in these spaces that might not always be listened to. One thing that I guess I live by is like not every message will be received by everyone, but there will be someone who eventually will listen to you. And when you find that person who can support your voice and who can be able to do that, stick with that and really bounce ideas off of that person and be able to find that support with them. I also feel that it can be really tough, I think, to be even on this panel with some amazing experienced speakers here, but it's still something that we're all in a learning process, and I think if you're able to approach it from continual learning and everyone's going to sort of mess up and everyone's going to fall down, then it'll be okay. At least that's how I feel. I hope that's helpful.
May I just, okay, thanks. I just want to encourage all the young generation, especially the ladies. It might be you who have to break that glass ceiling, and don't be afraid. So don't be afraid. You'll fail. You'll get rejected 20 million times, but there'll be that one time you'll have that opportunity. Speak at COP. This is when you can accost the leaders, the world leaders. You can accost the ministers, the partners, the multilateral agencies. Make use of all the opportunities presented to you. And I've agreed with all my fellow panelists and also the students here. Take in as much as you can, but go out there, market yourself, especially with us women. I'm an electrical engineer. It took forever to be recognized in this space 20 years ago, but I am here now. So it's possible. If it's possible for me, it's possible for you. And I'm from an island, and I'm colored, and I'm a woman in an engineering world, so it's possible. Nothing is impossible. Kudos to you, young generation. You can make it.
All right, we're going to have to end it there on that incredibly positive, supportive note, so thank you. I want to thank all of our speakers on this panel. I'd like to thank the first set of panelists, thank all the organizers of this side event. Climate leadership across generations is a really important topic and something we all need to keep talking about. I'd also like to thank the the Youth Environmental Alliance in Higher Education. We've been talking here a lot about dialogues. I'd like to encourage all of you, everybody in this room, to reach out if you want to join us. We're an inclusive network of people, students, faculty, and everywhere in between, trying to reach out and connect with others. So it's yeah-net.org, and please don't be shy. We'd love to meet you. Thank you all for coming today.